This is the Code to Cash podcast.
Pricing is not a billing problem. Pricing is a code problem. Pricing is a product.
Price point is really the last thing that actually even matters.
You need to have the most atomic unit of your product, not your product.
Hello and welcome. This is the Code to Cash podcast. This is Ajit Andor, your host. Today we have Jonathan Friedman. He is the CEO of Demostack, and we're going to have a fun conversation about all things startups, pricing, monetization. So stay tuned. Lots to learn.
Awesome. Yeah. So, my name is Jonathan. I am the CEO and co-founder of Demostack. Demostack was founded about just less than 2.5 years ago, so we're a very young company. I'm originally from Israel. I've been an entrepreneur most of my career. Really, almost since I can remember myself, I tried to build some kind of business or sell something to someone, a different range of success. But I think starting from sales, I think eventually everyone is selling something to someone in a sense, but in a good way. But I think it's a great way to think about business. Eventually, there is a transaction. You have something, and a third party that is not someone that cares about you, not your mom, or your dad or your auntie needs to trust you enough to do a transaction with you, and the mechanism to bridge the lack of familiarity, trust that's inherent in like a family is money, essentially, is the exchange of value. And I think, once you get that principle from the beginning of life, then a lot of things you can build on top of that, a lot of other skills like tech skills and product building skills. But it's always that transaction. Everything boils to that. You're interacting with someone that doesn't have familiarity with you. And if you think about it in terms of, that's like a big invention of humanity. Before that, we were in tribes, so you're 50 people, you know everyone. And when you want to interact in a tribe that's not yours, that trusts you and grew up with you, you need that interaction. So I think that was an early skill I got. But I've lived around the world. I lived in, I was in Holland. I think that's where I started my first tech business. I was in school and started a tech company called Student Events, where we aggregated students for events, professional events like case study competitions, stuff like that, and sold access to recruiters. That was my first. I raised angel money while still in school. I was like, oh my God, people would give me money to create my idea. But I really didn't know what I was doing in terms of tech. I was trying to build a website to aggregate it. I took contractors and tried to build this magnificent thing with chat and a million other things, and it wasn't very successful at that, obviously. But I learned a lot, and eventually we did sell to a Dutch company that kind of continued it a little bit. And then I went back from Holland to Israel and founded a company called Reactful. That was my first, proper VC-funded company. We were in the conversion optimization space. With that company, I actually moved from Israel to the Bay Area to start our US operations. Eventually, we sold that company too. And I was thinking about starting a new company when I met the CEO of TripActions, which is a corporate travel and expense management company, now worth an area of $10 billion in this economy, which is great. Back then they were smaller. I met the CEO and he asked me if I wanted to do a startup within a startup and convinced me to do that. And I joined the leadership team there, the executive team, and built a whole product from the ground up, which was a great experience. They just raised their round C. So seeing a company goes from a certain, amount of scale to the other pieces helped me see the flip side of how it looks like on the, exactly where I didn't get to before with the other companies, which was very unique. And then also seeing it hit COVID, and go to the other side, so what downsizing means. But I built their product called TripActions Liquid, which is the expense management part, which is a huge part of the business now. And then encountered the demo problem. Again, encountered it in Reactful. I re-encountered it in TripActions. And when I saw that I'm sitting there with all the resources in the world and can't showcase my own product, I felt like a fool. I was like, what am I missing? Why can't I demo my product? I built it, so why can't I showcase it? Why am I hitting all these snags? And eventually, by hitting my head against the wall multiple times, trying to figure it out, I had an aha moment. And that aha moment took me to build Demostack. So that's kind of how I got here.
So I'm curious, Jonathan. I've actually in the past, I used to be the demo guy for one of my companies before Medallia. Like I built many demos, like 300 plus, served a lot of SEs. I'm curious where were you getting frustrated specifically? Because it's like the founder insight, right? Like what key realization did you, like the frustration and the realization? I'm curious about that.
Right. So the frustration was it started very benign, right? Like in the beginning when the product was really young, it was only me demoing. And our first customer was TripActions' finance team. We're using it internally, right? It was like first customer, so to say.
Yeah.
And that was all good. And then I showed like how TripActions is using it and how, they had this issue, we solved this, and this issue, and we solved that. And it was very real because I was selling to mid-market companies. We were a mid-market company. I really had a customer. The finance team was like, I need to solve this and this problem. And I could show that very easily. So it was very organic, very real. And I felt very comfortable. It started being an issue when you needed some kind of scale. So when it was not only me demoing it, now I need to have 5 more AEs, someone for marketing, and 3 others in partnerships. Suddenly the finance team's like, hey, we don't want all these people here. This is a product. It's a fintech product, right? Or in any other product. We don't want these people here. It's we can't control it. They can move money. We don't trust it. They have access to data that's weird and that they shouldn't see, and it makes us nervous. And the legal, we're like, yeah, you're showing information from TripActions here. We can't compliance, all that. It's like, okay, I can't show the real environment. No biggie. And I think my reaction is, which probably everyone goes like, okay, let's have a fake customer, right? Like the Acme.
Acme, yeah.
Or Acme's our biggest competitor in Demostack. We hate them, right? We're like, no, we don't hate them, but they're like our biggest competitor, so to say, because really Acme is where everyone goes. We try to do Pied Piper from the show. There's Wayne Industries. There are a lot of these competitive companies out there from different shows.
I hear Patrick Star and SpongeBob are strong users in a lot of demo environments. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where I went, right? I went to Pied Piper. I put the people from the show. And I was like, we had the pictures and the website. So it was great. We high-fived. We have a demo environment. But actually, I started getting people were like, we can't show this. I was like, why? We have a demo environment. What's wrong, right? We onboarded this customer. We had to, this fake customer, even without a bank account. We had to hack it, but we did it. It's all done. What's wrong? Like, what are we showing? All these stories went away. And then I opened the environment up, and I was like, oh, really? I mean, first it looks like a joke, right? It's Pied Piper, and nobody's like, oh, I'm Pied Piper, that's me. It's a gag, but I'm not looking for laughs. I'm trying to sell my product. I'm trying to promote my product, not trying to make people entertained. So that's the first thing. Second, it was all empty. There's no activity. All the months are empty. All the graphs are flat. There's nothing to show. All the stories that we have that were organic of this problem, that problem are gone away. And nor will there ever be activity because this is not a real account. So I was like, okay, got it. Okay, we need to reanimate this empty bucket.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you reanimate it? There's not going to be usage, so you have to fake usage. Okay, how do you fake usage? You can't use the actual... where do we have data? Oh, we have data either by customers. I don't want to touch customer data. That's where I started from. Or TripActions data, which was exactly where I started from. Like, okay, so we need to take the data, transform it, and then shove it in. So that turned out to be way harder than I thought because first, products are not built to take data from the outside. They generate data as you go, right? That's like what they're built to do. And second, like trying to fake data is way harder than you think. I mean, things are organic,
It's
totally.
And so I started putting engineering there, and the engineers were putting scripts. And I was like, don't spend a lot of time on this. Do it quickly. They did it quickly. They build a script. They don't build a product. They build a script, and that script takes data from here, changes it up, shoves it there. But then the product updates, right? So there's another column in the table. Everything falls apart. A month passes. The graph is empty again, so it needs to regenerate. You can't do it one time.
Yeah.
And I found by putting more and more engineers and having a more and more crappy environment than I had when I started out. And then at some point I was like, wait, how are you the only person demoing in the world? Did you invent demoing software? Probably not. So you're missing something. What's wrong? And so I looked in the Slack channel, TripActions, like demo environment, and saw 7 years of issues trying to build a demo environment. So I was like, okay, TripActions didn't get it. Maybe TripActions is not that great of a company in this field. And I started reaching out and I said, how do you demo? What do you do? And then I figured out like everyone has something and roll with the punches. And I think the big aha moment for me is that you asked for founder insight was I realized that actually the issues I have is because I'm trying to actually build 2 products with one team.
Yeah.
Why is it a different product? Because it's a different persona. I'm not building it for companies, employees trying to do expense management. I'm building it for my go-to-market team. That's a whole different persona. It can be more different. The goal is showcasing. It's not expense management. So it's also the product is trying to do something completely different. right? And then the metrics I'm tracking, I don't care about expense management in these things. I care about showcasing metrics, like how many demos am I doing, how long, who, and managing whole people are performance essentially. So I was like, different use case, different user, different persona. I'm building a different product.
Yep.
It's confusing and confusing because it looks the same, right? It's a stage that looks the same as your real product, but it's a different product. I think that was the insight. And then Demostack is trying to answer, what is the best showcasing platform in the world? What could that look like? And so that's what we're trying to answer.
Awesome. That's a great starting story.
I love the story, and Jonathan, I can tell you from my time at New Relic, like you literally like cross-checked every single emotion I had throughout this journey, like the frustration, the data, trying to make it work. Then you realize we just added a new feature when we didn't build the script for that. Then we had a full team doing just that, and they were like super busy all the time, trying to capture those moments and help our GTM teams like continue to demo. So for me, it's like, spot on.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, would love to get it a little bit into the topic of monetization. So I'm curious, you've had a lot of success in a very short amount of time with the company. How did you come up with your initial sort of pricing hypothesis for this product? You mention a little bit about like the use case and the buyer, but I'm curious how that has evolved since you started and where it is now.
Right. So I think, my philosophy around monetization, first of all, it's an art and science. You probably talk about it all the time. Mm-hmm. I think the journey that I described, and I loved seeing your reaction to it and yours through it, where you're like, oh, I get it. It's like, the reason I felt very good coming into this idea is because I literally tried to solve it for myself. I literally tried, I went through the motions, and I was sitting in a company that was well funded. I was high up enough to move things around. And I saw I just cannot unless I start to dedicate most of my time. So I think the problem was very clearly stated just because I went through that blender of trying to do it. And the value to me, I know as a business leader within TripActions, of course, they're a customer now and they're seeing tremendous value from this, was very clear. And when you have that kind of clarity, I think it makes it way easier to get into monetization pieces. And I think my situation, I mean, some companies are like that, but some are founded and are not like that. Sometimes you build something, you think there's value, you're not sure to who, how much, when, and how to capture it and why. I think in my story, I had so much clarity going in. I was like, okay, I can charge for this, right? Day one. I don't need to, think about it or find ways or be very smart about it. So I think we were very clear that it gives you confidence to say, like, we're doing this for you and we want you to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So we came in with motivation very clearly from day one. Obviously, we started low because the idea is first like we think we can build this, but we're not sure. Like it's, can you build a demo environment outside of your org, right? Like can we copy your product? And we have many ways to do it today, but that was a big technological question and an operations question. And then obviously products that start out are not great, right? You always have products take a while. It's like they're in the oven, they need to bake up. So you can't come and charge an arm and a leg for it. You need to find customers that are willing to come with you and pay something to show seriousness. But yeah. So I think we knew we were going to do a SaaS company. So a lot of our things were very clear on how we came in. What we decided to model on is companies that are in our space, not competitors, but companies that sell similar tools like Gong, like Outreach, right? They sell a license model that's a per user model. There's a platform fee and then a per user model. So I was like, hey, let's go for familiarity. Our ICPs, ideal customer profiles, they know these tools, they pay for it, they know these kind of contracts, and they can kind of assess and also compare. So if we start low, but we have the same model, they can see, okay, Gong cost me 3 times as much. This is still valuable. I'm going to pay 1/3 as much for in the beginning, and of course we increased pricing overall. So I think these really helped us like narrow and be focused on pricing that makes sense from the get-go.
By the way, Jonathan, I think you're touching something throughout the story as well, which made me kind of wonder, like you're solving a problem for GTM teams, but you're also solving problems for the engineering team that used to be tasked to build this for them. So I wonder if you had some of that incorporated into the way you thought about monetization, because ultimately I can see a world where there is an R&D team out there that says, hey, I'm willing to pay for Demostack. That's going to save a lot of our time right now. So I wonder if the different personas and we're part of that thought process or not necessarily.
No, correct, absolutely. So we had we painted out that we have essentially a monetization piece. We have two pitches essentially. We have a cost-saving piece and a revenue-enhancing piece. And based on the customer, we can go to different places. Sometimes they're like, "Hey, we have 3 engineers working on this. Okay, what if you could have them work on a feature? Would that be useful for you?" Yes. Okay, great. So that alone, like, hey, an engineer is probably one of the most expensive resources in a company. And like you said, in a company, eventually you need to put engineering resources. There's no way a company grows to a certain size and has more than 20, 30, 40 people showcasing product regularly and not have some supporting engineering activities. There's just no such thing.
Yeah,
they
makes
sometimes
sense.
recognize it, they sometimes don't. Some have it very clearly, some are doing it as a side project. But there is somewhere that is. And there's also other things like cloud costs, for example. Like imagine, I don't know about New Relic, but I imagine companies like that. If you for every demo instance, you need to boot up all the demo and all the AI, all the
100%.
databases. Like
100%.
you're booting up all this stuff. Me as Demostack, I only copy or clone or showcase your front end. So I cheat. My cloud costs with your product are way lower. Right? I pay 1/5 or 1/10 of what you are paying. So that's like another piece. And then updating it, and user management, and all the operation. There's a demo operations piece aside. So that's the cost side, and then the revenue enhancing side is where I can tell you, hey, what would be like if your demos were more stable? You could share them after. You'd get analytics and can analyze how your people are showcasing, or you can make it more personalized, faster. So if you have a personalized landing page, does that help you get more leads? You'd be like, yeah, okay. So a personalized demo, so deep in the funnel, would that help you close more deals and look better? I think, and then the people nod along. Okay, great. Can you close 2 more deals with us? Okay, so that's what we're charging. Something like that. So we try to go on both. I think the revenue enhancement is more exciting. Cost saving is less. But actually, I think with the market turning, it kind of shifts around a little bit. Yeah. So I think it ebbs and flows, and of course with different customers. I love the fact that we can argue both sides. I think it's very helpful that you can to build a monetization model when you have both sides. You can really argue them. You're not like waving your hands. It feels very real.
And go ahead, Ajit. I saw you. You had it.
No, I was curious about you mentioned the user model is something you went with and compared with other similar tools for your buyers, right? I'm curious, like how there's a lot of some founders find some pressure nowadays to do free trials. There's PLG is pretty much in the news, and then you are going to ask the same question. Yeah, so I'm just curious, like how, were you consciously making a choice for this, and like what were your thoughts around like the actual delivery of the pricing model?
Yeah, I think Ajit, you and I spend way too much time together. It's like way too much time together. But go ahead, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
I think we gave it a lot of thought, and I think it really depends on. I mean, the key word for me is congruency, right? For people who don't know English as a second language, congruency is essentially having a cohesive story where all the things you're saying point to one another and make internal sense, have internal logic upon them, right? That's congruency, and so. Pricing models and points have to have congruency with your product, with your market, with the ICP. So that's what you're looking for first and foremost. Right? You might get the pricing right, you might have a different number. I think that's secondary versus the congruency piece. So what do we mean with that? For example, if you're saying, I'm selling premium software, I'm going to be strategic for you and change the way you do X, but I'm going to charge you $50 for it. Then people don't think like, wow, great, it's so cheap and it's going to change or something, right? It immediately says like something's wrong here. It's probably not that strategic. So you see, so that's where congruency falls apart and actually destroys what you're doing.
Makes sense.
So I think we were congruent. So I think in order to be congruent, first you need to look in and understand what am I selling? How hard is it to deploy? Do I need to go to a sales motion, or can I get to an end user quickly? For us, we knew that we were trying to replace a demo environment. It's somewhere in between. It's in between people. There's some discovery in order to get into the organization. There's some work to do, especially in the early days, to figure out how they demo, what they do, and kind of map it onto our product. And so we knew there's work here. It's not like something we can just put a quick landing page and get people to register. We did some of that to get interest, but not like download something and start working. We knew it won't be like that. from the get-go, and we knew the value is strategic. And if I tell you, hey, all these activities you're doing around the demo environment, they don't need to be done. It's also worth real money to you because, like what we talked about, it replaces an engineer, it saves you money, you can sell more. So knowing all these pieces, that goes into the inputs of like, okay, how do we price it? And we knew we wanted to price it in a way that's more very inside sales focused, with a model that people know, and not trying to do anything too clever about this in distribution. I do think eventually like pricing and quickness is key to build really great companies. It just makes you think about things in a way that optimizes for value, and that's quick, and eventually we're selling to people. People, as generations go, have less and less time to give you, less and less patience, and are more and more technological savvy, and just want to touch it and feel it because that's like how they want to experience your product. So I think, you can start somewhere, but eventually you want to build your way into that fast. And we're definitely going there too. But you need to build a certain layer of technology, build up, understand what you're doing to get there. So you can get lost in PLG really fast and build a lot of flows and attachment, right? Because essentially what you're doing with PLG, you're shifting weight from people explaining and holding your hand to the product explaining and holding your hand. One of them is definitely more scalable. The issue is it's less degrees of freedom. So if you know what you're exactly doing, then you don't care about degrees of freedom, you just need scale. If you don't know what you're doing yet because you're in the start and you don't know how your product is being used, then you should probably value degrees of freedom before you go to scale. So that's how I see that.
I love the way you've highlighted you can get lost in PLG. I think I wouldn't be exaggerating saying that we are experiencing and observing firsthand a generation of founders lost in PLG. Like we're seeing that every day people are bought into the idea, but when it comes to delivering on the promise, we see that gap every day. It's immense.
Yeah. It is. I mean, look, I think it's so like, hey, why do you have the product? It's such an amazing concept, and also every B2C product you touch is essentially PLG. Nobody had to hold my hand and explain how TikTok works. I log in, I see a video, I'm like, how do I scroll, right? No, I don't scroll right. You need to scroll up, right? So I got it. It's like, okay, that's how I want to explain. I don't want, if a TikTok representative will call me and like, hey, Jonathan, let me come to your house and show you 20 minutes of how to use TikTok, I would freak out. That would be so. Of course, I think it makes a lot of intuitive sense, and as consumers, that's where you want to take your product. I just think from a B2B angle, you're thinking business problems are big, they're abstract, they have a lot of people inside. And so bottling it up into, just like a very clean experience. I'm not saying it can be done for sure, but it goes against the grain of intuition for us as consumers. And you can see it even in examples like Slack versus Teams, right? Slack had like the poster boy of PLG, and of course did amazingly well. And like, I wish for myself and every entrepreneur out there to have a Slack-sized exit. But in terms of like business, hey, like Teams probably did not have that, right? It's not, I think most people agree, it's not that elegant of an experience. But if you look at business size, they're like triple the size of Slack, right? So clearly there's a way where you can do it very enterprisey, very, in some kind of way. Of course, it's also Microsoft who has a big enterprise muscle and all that, but that's when I talk about congruency. So if Microsoft would go and try to build only about user experience and try to do PLG, that would not be congruent with who Microsoft is. So again, it goes back to congruency, whereas Butterfield, the CEO of Slack, probably had it in him. He was a designer, and so that was congruent with his personality, his DNA, the company he was building. So that's very important.
Yeah, I love that way of finding good balance between not only what is the company, because you've mentioned it a couple of times. It was, who are we selling to, like your ICP? Then you went about the problem that you're solving, and then you went about what it is mean to me as a founder to go in and sell it, and then you kind of tied all these notes together into a coherent story that also, bubbles up into your pricing strategies. I think that's really interesting.
Thank you.
One of the things Dor and I are really interested, Jonathan, is how so from a business strategy standpoint, it makes perfect sense. Oftentimes, we've seen companies find hard to be very agile with pricing, even if it's a sales-based, user-based model. I've had a lot of past experience where things were so took so much time to change, like that fast experience you were talking about. It's not a fast experience from a pricing standpoint. So I'm just wondering what instrumentation or what technology do you have to build internally to support a fast experience? Like you can have a user-based model, but how often do you have to think? Are you thinking about changing pricing, and how much does technology sort of hold you back in sort of that regard?
Right. I would say in the beginning, I think in the beginning, when you start a company, you have a vast, let's say, problem space to explore, right? Pricing can be anything. You don't have any data points. You don't know anything.
Yep.
So you should, in my opinion, this is what we try to do. We try to be as lean as possible and not keep those degrees of freedom so we can navigate that space as fast as possible. What do you mean with that? So, I love it when there's pricing pages on websites, right? But when you don't know your pricing, that's hard to do, right? And I came and then the only pricing would be call us, right? So it's just no pricing at all. So only now we're putting on a pricing page, because now I actually know what I'm selling and how and all that. And I think so. I would even depend if you go on our stage, which is a SaaS kind of inside sales. It's pricing in a contract. In terms of limiting packages and all that. I think it's okay being more loose, right? So you give more feature rather than building those limiting features. Just write it contractually, right? A company big enough would not go over the contract, right? If you say you can't use X, so someone go rogue. If they did it, fine. Who cares? Contractually you can be hey, you did this. I saw it.
Right.
It's not fair. That's going to actually be a renewal expansion. So don't be afraid to be more generous. Don't be afraid to be generous. That's why you have VC money. You kind of be generous. Don't be too generous. Don't lose. I think that's a lesson today as well. But you need to be a little bit generous. You need to give more value than you capture in the early days.
Yeah.
And in return, what you get is data and information to actually start understanding how to price. That's the trade-off. And so you need to, one, don't be afraid to be generous. Two, don't be afraid to make mistakes. So sometimes you'll underprice. Sometimes you'll overprice, right? And then you get a customer that's what is this? I'm paying this much. Sorry. Here's a discount. Here's money back. That's also okay, right? So give permission to yourself and to your team to make these mistakes and roll it back if needed.
Right.
And then I think you need, if you're not playing with your pricing, if you're not especially trying to push it up, you're not getting to the right conversations or limits. Why is that? Because, like I said in the beginning, money is that tool that balances lack of inherent trust. And if you build something and you don't know what the counterbalance is exactly in terms of pricing, the money you can get back, you have not you're missing out on a huge piece of knowledge. So understanding, knowing how to balance that piece is just an important point. Then you can decide to be under it because you want to get market share. You want to be above it because you prefer being more efficient. But first, you're almost like, if you're into scuba diving, you have your buoyancy point, right? You need to add enough weight to just counter your natural buoyancy with the vest and all that. Once you have that point, you can deflate or inflate and go up and down and decide what you want to do or actually take in air. But you need to find that buoyancy point. And I think if you don't do that as an entrepreneur, you are missing a critical piece of information in your market. And then back out and make any decision you want with your board, but find that buoyancy point and be very understanding about it. Because if you find it to be $5,000 or $100,000, that can take your company to different price points, different. So it's such an important signal from the market. Not finding it and not doing the experimentation to go up, down, up until it balances is a huge miss.
What sort of, I'm curious from your conversation with customers, right, about the buoyancy point, what conversation or what will you tend to hear from prospects if you are under the point, or what might you hear from them when you're over? Like, I'm just qualitatively trying to understand, like, what are the signals, like maybe in the conversation they're having with you? How does it change when you're either below or above, just to get a sense of the dynamics?
Well, I think below is like you tell them a price and they're like, okay, great, send me the contract. Okay.
And they're like,
Now?
oh
Yeah.
man.
All good. You're perfect.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense.
You know, and then up, they're like, oh, I need to talk to my CFO, I need to talk to my CEO, I need to get
Right.
people involved. The
Right.
competition is 3x cheaper, this x cheaper.
Right.
Also, by the way, that is important information to flush out. Like we come up a lot of time, 2, 3, 4x more expensive, and other people in their deal. And I feel I can justify it very reasonably, and I'm okay to walk away for a customer that's looking for the cheapest deal. But again, if I didn't know my buoyancy point, I wouldn't be able to say that. I would just take any price because I don't know it. So
Makes sense.
I think, eventually you want to get some kind of, you need to get minimal resistance at least. If you don't get any resistance, that, again, it's fine if I know my buoyancy point and I price under it to not get resistance because I just want market share. I'm all obsessed with logo growth and I price under for low resistance. That's fine, but I'm doing it consciously.
Right.
So that's
Makes
kind of that. Resistance is the name of the game. How much resistance you're. And in the buoyancy point, it's exactly where you have like 50-50,
Yeah. Makes sense.
Send me the contract versus I need to talk to my CFO, it's like exactly that like middle
Makes
point.
sense.
Jonathan, realizing that you're big on, your product, what you do is big on sales. You talk a lot, with sales folks, Demostack is essentially solving one of their biggest problems. Thinking about pricing in that standpoint, like many times, like the first people, on the front line to talk with the customers about pricing are sales, like sometimes even as part of the demo or after the demo, I hope, or, on the discovery call talking about budget. What would be like interesting, kind of like insights or, key points that you would say are, interesting for sales folks doing those conversations as they try to discover pricing, as they try to discover budget, as they kind of do this, buoyancy, finding that buoyancy point? What would you say that will be like interesting ways for them to have a wedge in and have this conversation appropriately?
Well, there are a few techniques and methods. I would say everything starts with discovery. Like learn the pain of your customer. Really learn what they're solving for them. You might discover for certain companies you're solving such a big pain. Like you said, New Relic, three developers can be rerouted and they hate working on the demo environment, right? Because if they feel it's not like as cool as building features. They're like, okay, just that alone, that framing alone makes it so if a developer makes $200,000 a year, right? Not even that experience of a developer these days. So, it's, without thinking about anything else, it's a $600K problem today, right? So that gives you a certain framing versus if you talk to a 50 people company, like, oh, we want to start demoing, our demo environment is okay, I need 5 people on it, right? Then it might be, and they're only starting to sell right now. Then it's probably not much of a bigger problem. And then you find your customer in there. So I'm not saying I try to just like raise the price as it's a big problem. You can probably do more for them, right? They need more features, more seats, more capabilities, more CSM hand-holding, stuff like that. And that's how you package, essentially. So discovery is everything. Once you're out of discovery and you built the use case, hopefully that, you and the customer by then see the world through the same lens. So you see what this could mean, and customer sees if both of you see it the same way, then the pricing discussion just becomes easy because then that's the balancing point, right? Eventually, customers are looking for 3x ROI minimum, right? Maybe 10x ROI, maybe 100x. So you need to make that business point. You're going to show a price, and that price needs to balance the amount of ROI that can be done. So if you did your discovery right, if the customer now shares your worldview because you demoed the product right and showed and mixed that with their problem. Now that balancing point becomes really easy if you can be like shoot for 3x, 4x, 5x of value, then they can go internally and sell it. Because also your champion, they don't sign the check themselves. They need to go to someone and make that story. So the story needs to be again congruent. So that's the piece. I think if you look for tactical advice, I think that the best salespeople don't quiver. They can say this is going to be $150,000, and they don't bat an eye. And I remember when I started, I was like, this is going to be, I think, 10,000, but don't worry, we're going to discount, and it's hard to sit down and ask for
totally.
200,000, $1 million, right? It's crazy money, right? And not something that I'm used to have in my bank account every day. So that is a piece. But I think, if you have the congruency with the value story, then pricing is just like another little brick you put on top, and it's not this big reveal of what this is going to take.
Yeah. Love it.
Okay, one more question closer to like advice for founders, and we asked one question around initially people are looking for PLG versus sales led, and they're trying to make a decision. Another thing, like you mentioned, you're launching a pricing page, right? That's another thing people get confused about is, and I've seen cases where you launch a pricing page and customers are like, I want the cheaper plan. So there's like all this dynamic that happens. Do you have an opinion, like you should have it or shouldn't have it? Are you anticipating any dynamic change once you actually release the page to the public?
Yes. Look, in general, I am someone that tries to go for transparency. I don't think radicals, you can't say everyone, I mean, that's just not how humans function. So I'm not looking for everything needs to be transparent 100%. Nobody works like that.
Right.
But I think pricing is a critical piece. It helps, companies might look at this and look at the pricing page and they're just like completely not in the stage, right? They can't pay more than $5,000. No matter what you do and how much you squeeze, there's no more than $5,000 there. Right. So they might not be a good fit for a solution at this stage of time. So why bother? Why waste their time signing up, leading, getting excited, trying to learn about the product? You waste their time, which is very precious. And you also waste your time because they're going to sign up to a demo, talk to someone, 20 minutes, get an overview, get asked questions. And then like, how much is it? And you're like, oh, $20K. Oh, okay. That's not in my universe at all. So I think like transparency eventually helps this dynamic and helps sets ballpark. Yes, everything is a trade-off, so cannibalism of lower pricing can get there. But I truly believe, I think the fundamental thing I believe is that if you're in a well-balanced capitalistic system, we can discuss if that's really the case, but let's assume for a second, at least in the US, that capitalism, for the most part, works. If you build something that adds value at a certain scale, you will get rewarded by it, and the reward is again that balancing mechanism, which is price and money. So I think you're balancing a short-term, long-term play. If you can't, talking to a wrong customer today might maybe get you an extra few sales, but they're going to churn. They're not going to not love it, and then talk badly about you and never come back. Versus like catching them later, 2 years after, when you have a package, you actually know what you're doing and you know how to make a package cheaper and easier, and actually serve that customer. You don't want to talk to that customer today, or you want to tell them like, hey, I'm not for you. And then also maybe the perception is like, oh, that was a cool tool, but very expensive to me. And then 2 years later, they grew, right? They're a bigger company because, and they're like, and you have a cheaper package, and then they're like, oh, you can meet them again, and it makes sense. So I think eventually broadcasting what you are for real, and it's part of what we talk about demoing. Demoing is essentially products are these kind of fortress walls. They're behind walls, right? Like logins and security, and they hold precious data. It's like this castle that looks from the outside nice, but you don't know what's going in because of the walls. And Demostack's kind of trying to turn it inside out and show the guts in many ways, and give you the experience of what it would mean to be in the castle if you pay the price to get in.
Right.
So I think that I share that belief in general. If you broadcast who you are, you're proud of it, it's congruent with everything else, you are doing everyone in the market a service, saving everyone time, making sure you have the right discussions. And even if you have less of that, it still makes sense because it's probably where you should be in that amount, and the buyers that you should be. It's really better to talk to the right people at the right time rather than being broad. So yeah, get to a pricing page. But again, like it took us more than 2 years to get there. Yep. And some people complaining, like, why don't you have pricing? Why is it, and it's fair. It's fair criticism, but it's a trade-off we did. We're just like, hey, we don't know what it's going to price. What exactly do you need?
Yeah.
And we need a lot of information for you. And if someone's like, I don't want to know how much it costs because I want it, I only want that, then it's not a good fit for us. And it's okay. So we probably lost customers because of pricing or lack of pricing. But it's a trade-off we took. And now we're making this other trade-off because I'm actually more confident in the pricing, what I should charge, what the value is I can bring you. And so today we're ready.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Questions, Dor?
Yeah, I think this was perfect. Like,
All
I
right.
don't want to add anything
Yeah.
to that.